What's up, Giant fans? It's Twitter Tuesday on the LockedOn Giants podcast. Your questions coming up next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the LockedOn Giants podcast, part of the LockedOn Podcast family, your team every day. I'm Patricia Traina, your host, and we have a Twitter Tuesday today, but we have a lot of questions that center around the future of the Giants, specifically Saquon Barkley. We got a couple questions about him. We got some questions about Kenny Golladay. So this particular episode is kind of player-centric in most cases. So it's a small mailbag, but nonetheless, some really good questions. We're going to go through them, answer all your questions as we always do on this Twitter Tuesday. Welcome again to the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And thanks to those who sent in the questions. Let us jump right into what we have here in the mailbag. Let's kick it off with a question from Peter, who wants to know, do you believe we will see Xavier McKinney on the field full strength this year, or is he done? All right, Peter, I don't think we'll see any player on the field full strength unless the player has not played at all. You know, everybody's banged up this time of year, and even if a guy has several weeks off, it can take some time for them to really heal. But specific to your question about Xavier McKinney, I don't know. When I last spoke with Xavier, he was optimistic he would be back. I know that he has lost the heavy cast that he had on his broken hand, but I do not know how far along he is in his healing or his rehab. Now, if I happen to stumble upon him in the locker room, I will see if I can find out some more information, but I think there is hope that he returns. I don't think he's done for the year, but I don't know that. They're kind of, the Giants aren't really forthcoming with injury information. They tell you day by day, which is true, I guess, to an extent. But we know that some injuries are just not day by day. But I'll see what I can find out once I get back in the locker room, Peter. Because I just don't have an answer for you on that, other than what McKinney might have said a couple weeks ago when he had that injury initially, and that was that his hope was to return to the field before the end of the season. So I'll try and get back to you on that if I can find something out. But thanks for the question, Peter. And by the way, I tweeted something about the Giants having used 6 of their 8 designated to return from IR designations. Every NFL team is allowed 8 per season and a maximum of 2 per player. So the Giants have used 6. They designated 3 guys on Monday, Bredesen, Ojulari, and Tony Jefferson, to return. So that's 6 of 8. And I mentioned that because a lot of people said, well, what about Xavier McKinney? Does that mean he's done? Folks, Xavier doesn't count towards that allotment because he's not on IR. He's on NFI. NFI is a totally different ball game. And McKinney, I think he has to miss the same amount of games if he was on if he were on PUP. So I think he still has a few weeks to go before they could even think of bringing him back. But we'll see, where he is with his rehab. I don't know, quite honestly, where he is. I do know that the cast came off, and that's a good sign. But I don't know if it was replaced by a softer cast or a bandage or whatnot. So I'll get back to you on that, or at least I'll try to get you an answer. All right, Matthew at Tricky8 Ninja. Would you consider the Giants season a failure if they fail to make the playoffs, and have your priorities changed at all for which players we choose to resign? Matthew, no, I would not consider the season to be a failure. I know playoffs is always the goal, but the Giants, the rebuild, I think we could say, is a little further along than I think what most of us thought it would be. So I've been very, very encouraged by what I've seen. I think, the record is, They're kind of playing on house money. And I know some people will get annoyed when I say that. I happen to say that to a colleague and got chewed out for that. But that's what I believe. The Giants are playing with house money. Nobody saw this record coming, and it's a good thing. All right. So the Giants, this roster is not a complete roster. We know the shortcomings, with receiver. We know the shortcomings at inside linebacker. The depth in the secondary's got to be improved. There's some question marks regarding offensive line, the interior of the offensive line. It's not a complete roster. Give Joe Shane a full off season where he has a healthy salary cap and a lot of draft picks. And let's see what this team looks like next year. I think it's going to be a little closer to being a complete roster, and to the point where I would say next year, if the Giants don't make the playoffs, I think I would be more disappointed. Now, you also asked me if my priorities have changed regarding who the Giants resign. I don't think I ever outlined who I would resign if I were Shane. I'm kind of saving that for later in the season when we get close to the end, because I haven't given it quite, to be honest with you, I haven't given it much thought. I mean, you got to remember, we are now, this is new territory. We haven't been in this position for quite some time. And by this position, I mean, the Giants are still alive and play meaningful football. So normally, I know in the past, we'd start talking about the draft. We'd start talking about needs, who to bring back and all that stuff. No, they're still in that playoff hunt. So as long as they're in the playoff hunt, that stuff can wait. There'll be plenty of time to cover that stuff. And I will cover that in a show, and also on Giants Country. I'll mention that in an article. So sit tight on that one. Okay. Next question comes from Justin. Does it worry you that Make Jones beat us with his arm has been a winning strategy for the last 2 weeks? Is it that the receivers are just bad at getting open, or is Jones missing opportunities? Justin, I think it's a combination, to be honest with you. I mean, there have been throws that Jones has missed. Have also been receivers who have dropped passes, who haven't always gotten open or separated. So it's a combination. I'd have to go back and really, chart it play by play by play. But here's what I will tell you. A good quarterback, if he is challenged to beat a team with his arm, should be able to do it. And, the last couple games, the opponent has taken away the running game, and the Giants haven't been able to keep up. So draw your own conclusions there. Again, I don't think it's totally Jones's fault, 100% Jones's fault, but I'm not going to absolve him of the blame. I just can't. It would not be fair, and it would not be, objective of me to say that he is blameless. So again, down the line, I know over on the YouTube message board, somebody asked me for my assessment of Jones. That's a whole show for itself, folks. And that's coming, but I want to get through the rest of the season first. I don't want to make assessments now when I know that there's injuries, when I know there are other factors. I want to be able to go back and just look at the good, the bad, and the ugly and go from there. So that's how I feel about Daniel Jones at this moment. All right. Next question comes from Neymar Saquon. Do you think Daniel Bellinger and Evan Neal return for Washington team game? All right, Neymar, I think Evan Neal will be back. That is the impression I get. Of course, as I record this on a Monday night, the practice report hasn't come out. First practice is Tuesday, so I'd have to see who practices on Tuesday and who doesn't. And the Giants don't have to issue a practice report or an injury report, I should say, until Wednesday. But I'm pretty sure right now, I would say that Neal will be back. Bellinger, I'm not as sure. I know last I heard there was still a little double vision that he was dealing with. But that being said, last week in Dallas, he made the trip. He was running routes with the visor on, getting used to it. So that to me would suggest that he's made progress. Has the double vision subsided? that I would, I don't know for sure. I'd have to, ask somebody, but I'm encouraged by the fact that he was out there running routes and, working with the helmet with the visor on and looking none for the worse. So I'm encouraged that his return is probably sooner than later. So thank you for that question. All right, folks, we have several more questions coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. It is a Twitter Tuesday edition. Still to come, we've got some what would you do for the future type of questions specific to Saquon and a couple of other guys. So that is coming up a little later on in the show. First, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find Blocked Forever available as a bonus episode on LockedOn NFL right now. Blocked Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil, who takes the conversation about football to the next level. Khalil sits down with star players, coaches, and former pros across the league to get real about what happens on the field and behind the scenes, inside the locker room, during team meetings, and back at the team hotels. New episodes of Blocked Forever will be recorded and released every week ahead of Thursday Night Football. So head on over to the Locked On NFL podcast for a sneak peek of Blocked Forever, or catch the full series available anywhere you get your podcasts. Available everywhere for now for free. Audible, get in the game. Hey, Giant fans, thanks for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Trisha Traina. It is a Twitter Tuesday. I'm answering your questions here on the podcast. We have about a little more than 10, maybe about a dozen or so questions all together. Some specific ones that we're going to get to coming up in the show. So hope you will stay with us as we go through these questions. Let's get back to the next batch, starting with one from Elizabeth Contreras. Any news on Wan'Dale Robinson? All right, Elizabeth, I don't know if you mean has he had his surgery or where his injury status is, but Wan'Dale is done for the year with the ACL. Now, as far as I know, again, I haven't been in the locker room yet this week. I will be in the locker room at some point this week. They wait usually 3 to 4 weeks for ACLs to, the swelling in the ACLs to go down. So I don't know if Wan'Dale has had his surgery yet. My guess is he hasn't, but he's probably getting close to that date. So when I find something out, again, I will I will tweet it and update you that way. But right now, I don't have anything new regarding Wan'Dale Robinson and his status. All right, let's see. Next, Kevin Prasuti, I think is how you pronounce it, with Wink seeing a similar situation last year, excuse me, with his secondary getting banged up. Does he change his style and play more zone? Or does he continue his strategy in hopes that we can get home more often on blitzes? All right, Kevin, that's an interesting question. I think here's the thing. I know the Giants are getting a little healthier on the defensive side of the ball. They should have Ojulari back, which should certainly help, especially with any double teams that might have been existing. I believe Fabian Moreau should be back. Tony Jefferson is been designated to return. So they are getting some help back in that defensive secondary. So, Wink just kind of lives and dies by the blitz and being aggressive. He hasn't been able to be as aggressive the last couple of weeks because of the injuries, but I think, he's going to try and get back to that as he gets more healthy bodies in. So, obviously the depth is an issue. It's something, like I said before, Joe Shane's got to kind of build up the depth at certain positions. and give them a healthy salary cap. They'll fix a lot of problems that they have now once they're able to afford guys and do things that they really needed to do this year. But to answer your question, if guys are coming back healthy and ready to go, I think Wink stays with what has worked for him going back to the beginning part of the season when they were so good with especially with situational football. All right. Next, we hear from Giants fan at New York Giants News 26. Do you think Fabian Moreau comes back this week? We need him in the secondary badly. All right, Giants fan, again, I think Moreau should be back this week. I have not been in the locker room. We have not seen an injury report, but from what I understand, he should be back. You got to remember, a lot of the guys that missed the Dallas game, they were playing on a short work week. So those guys really didn't have a chance to heal up. They've had 10 days, or they will have had 10 days to heal up. So we'll see how much of a difference that makes. And I think Tuesday is going to be a big day. Even though there's no injury report coming out on Tuesday, it's still an opportunity to see who practices, who's moving around, who's doing what, for the first 20 minutes or so that the media is allowed to see practice. So the one thing, though, that I will caution you on is if the Giants hold a walkthrough on Tuesday, which is possible, then there's a possibility that we just won't be able to get a full, read on who's ready and who's not, and what people are going to be able to do. So that's just a little FYI that I would throw out there for those of you who are like me, wanting to know who's going to be back and who's not. So hope that answers your question. Okay, Giant fans, we have email questions now coming up. So let's get to the first one. Andrew G has a few. Let's see. Going forward, should Nick Gates be the center now and for the future? Yes, I'll answer that right now. Absolutely. As for the future of the wide receiver group, would you entertain bringing back both Slayton and Shepard at reasonable deals? Also, what position group do you foresee Shane putting the most resources into improving? All right. I answered the Gates question. I think absolutely he should remain the center. That guy, physical, an enforcer, calms that line down. Absolutely want to see him there. Regarding Shepard and Slayton, I would see if I could bring back Slayton on a reasonable deal, but I have a feeling Slayton's going to test the market. And I would not blame him if he tests the market because remember, the Giants asked him to take a pay cut. And basically it was take a pay cut or we cut you. So as good of a sport as Slayton has been, if I'm him, I see what's out there on the market. Now, as far as Shepard goes, that's a tough one. I like Sterling. I know the coaching staff likes him. I know the organization likes him. Sterling's been there on the side, cheering the teammates on, being there for support. But here's the thing. You can't make decisions based on sentimental value. You just can't. So do you really want to give a roster spot to a guy who has been injury prone, who is now coming off of or will be coming off of an ACL a year after, not even a year after having an Achilles injury? You got to be smart. And I say this, and trust me, Shepard's one of my favorite players. I would love to see him come back. I would love to see him, go out on his own terms. But from a business standpoint, I don't think it makes sense to bring him back, given his injury history, given what he's gone through, given what this receiver group needs. I just don't see it. And I hope I'm wrong because I love Shep, but again, I don't see it. All right. And your other question, which I'm going to just pop this back on, what position group do you foresee Shane putting the most resources in? All right. I had to take a look at that because I forgot. Andrew, I think receiver has to be number one. I could see a scenario where the entire receiver core is redone. I think getting another tight end to complement Bellinger. I don't think they really have a guy where if Bellinger has to miss time, there's not that much of a drop off. You definitely want to add some more along the interior of the offensive line. You want to address inside linebacker. You know, cornerback is another spot you probably want to address. So these are just positions that, off the top of my head, I would say need to be addressed. And I'm going to do, again, towards the end of the year, when the Giants season starts to wind down, I'm going to go into a lot more detail on free agency, what I would do and that sort of thing, or what I think the Giants will do. But just off the top of my head, those are some of the decisions that I would make if I were Joe Shane, or the areas that I would focus on. Now, some of you are probably saying, well, what about quarterback? Jury's still out on quarterback. I'm giving Daniel Jones to the end of whenever the season ends before I say, yes, he's coming back, or no, he's not coming back. Right now, today, I would say he's probably coming back, but not for big money. I wouldn't give him big money. And, I don't want to spoil that show because, like I said, that's a whole show in itself. But I would not give Daniel Jones a long-term contract, nor would I give him big money. And we'll talk about that when I get around to doing that show. All right, Giant fans, we've got a few more questions left. These are specific. We're going to talk about Kenny Golladay and Saquon Barkley in these next couple of questions. So that's coming up right after this. This episode of the LockedOn Giants podcast is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find Blocked Forever available as a bonus episode on LockedOn NFL right now. Blocked Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil, who takes the conversation about football to the next level. Khalil sits down with star players, coaches, and former pros across the league to get real about what happens on the field and behind the scenes, inside the locker room, during team meetings, and back at the team hotels. New episodes of Blocked Forever will be recorded and released every week ahead of Thursday Night Football. So head on over to the LockedOn NFL podcast for a sneak peek of Blocked Forever, or catch the full series available anywhere you get your podcasts. Available everywhere for now for free. Audible, get in the game. Hey, Giant fans, thanks for making the LockedOn Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, check out LockedOn Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only LockedOn can provide. LockedOn Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back, Giant fans, to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina. We've got a Twitter Tuesday, and now we're going to get to some hot topics here on the LockedOn Giants podcast, specifically Saquon Barkley. So let's get to these final questions. There were actually two that came in along the same vein. One from Jason M., who you see, his question is up there on the screen. Len J. also asked a similar question. And the gist of the question is should the Giants invest in Saquon Barkley, given, the money they would have to likely put out and the needs and the fact that a good running back can be found elsewhere in the draft, and so on and so forth. Okay. Here's my thinking. Barkley is a unique talent. Good receiver out of the backfield, which the Giants really haven't used him all that as much. Actually, I should say they haven't used him as much as I thought they would out of the backfield, which is kind of surprising. I would not sign Barkley to a long-term big money deal. Now, there are ways to manipulate the numbers so that Barkley has, a high APY. APY stands for average per year. I wouldn't go crazy with re-signing him because he's 25, 26 years old now. He's had a lot of tread on his tires. And I think, as Len J pointed out, running backs start to decline after a certain point. Very few guys keep running like they found the fountain of youth. So I think the Giants, if they want Barkley back, and I believe they do, they're going to have to pay probably around the same, if not more than what Alvin Kamara is getting, which I think is something like, I want to say 15 million a year or 14 or something like that. But again, it's how the contract is structured. And if you're the Giants, you can put in all kinds of little mechanisms to inflate the APY. For example, you could put in incentives. Maybe he gets $1 million if he rushes for 1,000 yards in a season. Maybe he gets another million if he makes the Pro Bowl. Maybe he gets, I don't know, 500,000 workout bonus. So there's ways you can inflate the numbers. And, if ego was a big thing, where Saquon has to be the highest APY amongst his position group, there are ways to make it happen without killing your salary cap. So it's going to take some creativity. I believe that when Saquon's contract comes up for renegotiation, it is not going to be an easy one. It's going to take some manipulation. They might even, for all we know, they might even throw some tiered, structured, guaranteed money in there. So I'm curious to see how that contract ultimately looks. I do not think, though, that the numbers that end up getting reported are going to be anywhere close to what the actual value of the deal. Just these contracts have a way of, being worth more than what they actually are. Because, the value sometimes that gets reported is assuming that the guy hits all the incentives and, finishes out the contract, which, as we know, very rarely happens. So if I'm the Giants, I maybe look at a 3-year deal. Well, actually, let me check that. I look at a 4-year deal that's actually a 3-year deal. And that, I mean, not necessarily avoidable year, but the opportunity to get out of it after 3 years. Maybe they'll do it sooner than that. Maybe they'll say, we want to get out of it after 2 years. But the reason why you have the 3 years or 4 years is to spread out the signing bonus, which is going to boost up the APY that Barkley is probably going to be looking for. So yeah, there's a bunch of things, and I keep saying this, I know, and I've got to do this show at some point, kind of waiting for the off season. But when I sit down and I do the salary cap show, I'll try and explain some of the mechanisms. Maybe I'll do that show live just this way, so you guys can ask questions regarding how things work. But there's different things that the Giants can do with tiered structures for guarantees, workout bonuses, incentives, likely to be earned, not likely to be earned, option years, all that stuff. So Barkley's contract is going to be, it's going to be a complex one. It's going to be a good study, I think, for those of you who are like me, enjoy looking at NFL contracts and salary cap stuff. So that's where I kind of see things going with Barkley. I do think he's back. Now, to the point of, could the Giants pick up a running back in the 3rd or 4th round for cheaper? Probably. But is that guy going to be like a Barkley with that two-way threat? Maybe not. You mentioned Tiki Barber. Tiki Barber was a 2nd-round pick. Ahmad Bradshaw, I know he was a 7th-round pick, but he fell because of some off-field issues. He otherwise, I think, projected to be like a 2nd or 3rd-round pick. So I don't think that's a fair apples to apples, comparison. So I'm curious to see what the Giants do with Barkley's contract. I do not think, though, at the end of the day, the actual value of the deal is going to be anywhere close to what ultimately gets reported. But we will see what his agent works out. That's why they hire these people, to work out the best possible deals. All right, we've got one more email that came in. This has to do with Kenny Golladay. Tyler J has a couple questions. With Kenny Golladay not getting a single target of offense, do you think it's a coaching decision not to make him a target, or is it a Golladay decision not to try and get open? And is there a way to deactivate him so the Giants can use his roster spot on someone who is going to be useful? Tyler, absolutely Golladay could be deactivated. That's a coaching decision. If they feel that, they need the roster spot for somebody else, they can do it. Now, that's money down the drain, obviously. But at this point, you could say that the money's been down the drain anyway. Regarding Golladay and the pass targets, I don't think it's necessarily a Golladay decision not to get open. You've got to remember something, Tyler. Golladay is probably not going to be on this team next year. It would behoove him to put the best possible film out there for the league so that whoever he ends up playing for sees an effort, sees him, being the receiver that he believes he could be. If he's out there dogging it, he's not helping himself. It's that simple. If he's out there, going half baked, then shame on him. He shouldn't be on a football team, period. So I do not think it is his decision. I think it could be a matter of what the quarterback is reading. Maybe the quarterback doesn't trust the throw because Galladay's not separating enough. It could be the play call. It could be any number of things. But I do not think that it's Galladay dogging it. I just can't fathom that would be the case. But if it is, shame on him. So, Galladay's not going to be here next year. I just do not see it happening. They need that salary cap money. I think Galladay is going to be a post June 1st cap designation. They'll use his cap savings to pay off the draft class that they bring in. They will also use that to have money to work with over the summer and into the start of the season. I don't know exactly what the money is going to be. I'd have to see what it comes out to, but it should be a healthy amount of money once Galladay is cut. So again, once we get done with the season, we'll talk about all things cap. That's a topic for another day. All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for us on this Twitter Tuesday. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again to everybody who submitted questions. And don't forget, if you got your question in after I recorded the show, I'll try and pick it up for Saturday's mailbag on Giants Country. So I won't leave you hanging too long. But, thank you for sending in the questions. Now, on tomorrow's show, I'm going to have a former NFL player on with me. You'll find out who tomorrow if you tune in. Thursday is going to be the crossover show with David Harrison of LockedOn Commanders. And then Friday, I'm hoping to do live with Datena and the dog. So you will not want to miss all that. Plenty of stuff coming here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. So thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We will catch you tomorrow, Giant fans.